Welcome to Recruiter Startup School. My name's David Ayre, and in this podcast series, I'll be interviewing investors, advisors, and entrepreneurs from the agency recruitment world in how to set up, scale, and operate a world-class recruitment business. I'm also running another podcast called Recruiter Abroad, which is a little more aligned to what we do for a living as an international rec-to-rec business. In my time working abroad, I met a guy called David Ayre, and he's been involved in multiple startups in Australia. He's a really impressive guy, and I've interviewed him on the other podcast, Recruiter Abroad. And I thought that I may as well share it here as a bonus episode because it's very aligned to what we talk about here. Let me know what you think of this. I think it's one of the best podcasts that we've done, and hopefully I'll give you a taste of what we're doing on the other podcast. Let me know. All right, thanks. And have a great week. And best of luck to England tonight against Colombia. Welcome to the Recruiter Abroad podcast. My name's David Ayre, and in this podcast series, I'll be interviewing expat recruiters who've emigrated around the world. This week, I'm speaking to David Ayre. He's a former colleague of mine when I was working in Australia. He's been in the industry for about 15 years. He's recognised as one of the best recruiters and recruitment leaders in the accountancy and finance world in Australia. David is a natural born winner. He has worked for Hayes, he's worked for Half, he's worked for Robert Walters, he's been the MD of the Anderson Partnership, and he got to a stage in his career where he realised that he had spent an awful lot of time making money for other people. So he decided to become a part owner of 2XM Finance, where he set up the accountancy and finance function for them in Sydney. He walked away from potential shares in the Anderson Partnership, and we discuss all of this and how he builds teams, how he identifies managers, how he, running 4 offices for the Anderson Partnership, was still billing. And I think you'll get a lot from this. I would say you get more from this than most of the interviews that we do, because David doesn't overcomplicate it and he gets right into the detail. And one of the things he said to me when I first met him was, recruitment's simple, it's just that people overcomplicate it. Hope you enjoy. Let me know what you think. David Ayre, how are you?
Oh, I'm very well, Daughter. I'm very well. How are you, Jim?
It's the morning here, but yeah, I'm hanging in there.
Good, man.
So look, it's great to chat to you. My biggest problem today was I didn't know which podcast to put you on. I didn't know whether we'd go on the Recruiter Startup School or the Recruiter Abroad. And because you're kind of a blend of both, I'll probably put it out on both channels.
I think a blend of both is the politest way anyone's ever put it, Daughter. So
that's the nicest thing you've ever been called.
It is, mate. We'll go with that definition. I can live with that.
All right. So before I jump into it, where are you right now? That doesn't sound like you're at home.
No, I'm a father of one and another one on the way. So I've had to find a secluded space at the back of the local pub. And I'm just enjoying a bit of peace and quiet from the family and vice versa. So, yeah.
So are you not that guy with the sports car and the fancy shirts anymore, or have you found a way?
No, look, I'd like to think I am, but no, the reality had to kick in at some point, Daughter and the kids, and I've definitely done that. And I don't begrudge it in the slightest. I still look back at those days with a little bit of embarrassment, to be honest. But
well, we're going to jump it. We'll jump into them. So, Dave, I've given everybody a bit of a rundown into your background, but can you just elaborate a little bit and let us know how you got into recruitment, and just we'll kind of go through your career a little bit.
Yeah. Look, I'll keep it as short as I can because, as you mentioned yourself, Previous chat, I've been in recruitment for a long, long time now.
How many years?
Very surprising. It's 15 plus years, let's just say that. And you break that down upon reflection into three sections. There were the 5 years I had in the UK, where you're very much learning your stripes and working in the market that most of us do originally. Before getting the opportunity to come out to Australia, and my first location was Perth.
What year did you go out to Australia?
I actually moved to Perth in 2007. I chose Perth because my family, my sister in particular, were living there. And I'm a big fan of the sunshine, and of all the cities I've lived in, it gets a higher percentage of sunshine than anywhere else. So Perth was my first landing point in 2007.
So
I was there for about 7.5 years.
You almost missed the recession as such.
Yeah, interestingly, from a timing perspective, and my career is very much a story of luck with timing. I didn't entirely miss the back end of that recession, and I got into recruitment just at the back end of the 2001, 2002 UK one. But when I got to Perth, people were still using the word boom. The market for me was very, very unusual. Companies and clients were hiring, left, right, and centre, and there were bidding wars for candidates. And having just come out of London, that definitely wasn't the case back home. So it was nice to experience what people refer to as the boom, but it didn't last long. By sort of early 2009, that had normalised in my definition. I don't think it necessarily crashed to the degree that some people think it did, but I'd certainly say it had clearly slowed down and become a more normal market.
What were those early days like? You obviously had done more than your apprenticeship in the UK. You did 5 years, then you joined Hayes. What was that like as an early transition?
Look, there's an interesting version on the period I had with Hayes. It's a company that I didn't think I'd work for at any point in my career, but I did really enjoy it. I think for a first move into the Australian market, it helped me both socially, integrating with a lot of people, and with the market as it was at the time, I was able to, by being pretty normal in my definition as a recruiter, and by that I mean meeting a lot of people and working hard, I was able to make a bit of money. Obviously not the high percentages of that money that I would have liked to have been getting, but I mean, I'm never going to knock the experience I gained in that 10 months with them. And, as a result of that 10 months with them, I met some good friends, and one of them led to the opportunity with Robert Half, which was where I spent the next 3.5 years. So, it was an interesting first year, and the market was buoyant. But I found that a lot of the people when I got here were a little bit lazy, and were taking that market a little bit for granted. And, for me to come in and achieve highly, I simply just did what I saw was normal, and that was getting away from my desk and meeting people and working hard. And, as a result of that, along with a number of other recruiters at that time, we were making some good money and having a little bit of fun, as you mentioned earlier, with sports cars and flashy clothes. So, it was a good time. So
you leave Hayes, and it's not like joining Robert Half anywhere else. Like, this was a startup project, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Myself, Nadia, and Eddie were the only three sitting in a serviced office on day one. Very unlike, and I can't comment what it's like to join Robert Half in a different location because I haven't done that. But I can speak highly of the experience, the support, of a global business, albeit it presented challenges being in the most remote city in the world. So, we were three good recruiters with support to call upon, but fundamentally we were working off the Dun & Bradstreet credit list and cold calling people to map out the market and start generating and building a company. So it was it was an interesting challenge, and one that I learned a lot from.
What would you say your key takeaways were from that? That was your first startup as such, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And the key takeaway from that was really that, and I've subsequently learned, is that nothing really changes in a startup environment, even with technologies now and social media. The big difference, LinkedIn is very prominent in our world at the moment. And back then in 2008, it wasn't as big, significantly not as well used. So we weren't able to rely on the obvious social media tools to map the market and to approach people. So the fundamentals of a successful startup for us back then were again being on the phone and getting out in front of people. And for me, across the the subsequent startups, even my most recent, my own business 2.5 years ago, I still stick to the true nature that a good recruiter uses the phone and uses their, wears out the soles of their shoes more than they ever rely on any technology. So, it was an interesting period. We had, like I say, great support. I was surrounded by some good recruiters, and it was a fantastic 3 years.
Okay, so sports cars don't come for free. What type of numbers were you guys doing in those days?
Oh, look, we were slightly fortunate, I think, from an awards perspective. The Perth office became the fastest growing office in their global portfolio for one of those years. I think the second year we were there, and then as a result, personal accolades were, the number 6 biller in the world in my category, and fastest or second or third fastest growing divisional manager. We had some of the best rookies of the year. We had some subsequently after my leaving. There were some, global number 1 billers that we brought into the group that stayed on. And you're right. The numbers we were billing were, myself never over $1 million, but there were people doing, subsequent to that in early mid $1 million per annum, which is often hyped up and talked about. But again, these were just, myself included, just normal people working hard. But yeah, it was, that was very much, we launched in 2008, and this was the period when everyone talked about it being a global financial crisis. Their American offices, which was the bulk of their footprint, were obviously struggling. And Perth wasn't booming at that point, but we were still churning out fees and enjoying ourselves.
And enjoying yourselves, a lot of sport, a lot of parties, all that.
Yeah, the expat life in WA, as you know, is it's very it's very outdoor driven. You can be outside because of the weather. So, being a big sports fan myself, in particular football and golf, I was joining local football teams and enjoying success there, playing golf with my friends on a regular basis, being at the beach, attempting and failing to learn to surf and various other bits and pieces on the water.
I've done that as well,
yeah. And there's different stories around successes and failures of that over another conversation. But yeah, very much trying to just enjoy the fact that when you make plans in Australia, generally, in particular in WA, you can plan to be outside at the weekend. So, we were working really hard, but the cliche is always live hard and work hard, and we were doing that.
So, how many years were you in half for?
3 to 3.5. Off the top of my head, I think it was about 3.5 years. 2008 to about 2011, something like that. 2011.
What powers of persuasion did Robert Walters have to be able to headhunt you out of there?
Interesting. I didn't take a lot of persuading. I was at a point where the Perth office had grown to, I think we had about 14 or 15 people. Ed Cross, rightfully at the time, had been made associate director for WA. I wasn't, and no disrespect to him, he'd admit I wasn't personally learning anything from that. And when I'd signed up to reporting to somebody else who'd subsequently gone off and started their own business. So at the time, I was talking to them about what was next for me, and they were looking at me going over to the Melbourne office. And I personally, I met my current wife, who I didn't know at the time would be, but I'd kind of hoped would be, and I didn't really want to move, which was unusual for me at the time. But Robert Walters got wind of that through a friend of mine, and obviously put the feelers out. And the reason I left was because I got the opportunity to, instead of just running the perm division, to take on that extra scope of temp and perm. In a business that, at the time I looked at and thought had a solid reputation, if not necessarily outstanding. They'd lost a lot of people. The team needed rebuilding. And I saw a lot of opportunity. So it wasn't so much of an arm twist to get me out. I did walk away from, as you always do, some healthy commissions and an opportunity to go to the Reach for the Stars Awards with Robert Half. But, those things are, they're important, but they're not as important as I've always valued the career move. So I made the move to Robert Walters, and again, I had a really interesting time with those guys.
I was starting out in recruitment then, and I remember you coming in and completely dismantling who was in that team, and then picking out who you were kind of going to keep and all the rest. And you did this within a 2 or 3 week window, it seemed. How do you like come to those thought processes so quickly on who's going to make it, who's not? How am I going to structure this team?
Look, I'm sure the people that were there to experience it would have their own version of how I did it. Mine was really just, by that point, with the experience at Robert Half and the previous, hiring experience I'd had, I have a very clear idea of what works and what doesn't. And, I was able to assess historical numbers for a few of the people in the team. I only inherited 5 people. Like I said, they'd lost a number of people to startups in the previous 6 months. They weren't having their best period in that WA era, and things did need to be changed. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted the role. So I had to be reasonably brutal because, whenever you're doing a startup, the key criteria are to get the right people in, to invest your time in training them, and to lead them by billing. And you can't carry the wrong types of people. And it's a two-way thing. It's not just me thinking they weren't necessarily going to be successful. I think one, if not two, of the people that stand out in memory went on to other companies, and I think they've done okay. I haven't really paid too much attention to it, but they weren't necessarily suited to what I was trying to create in terms of the activity I required, or the mindset or the attitude. So you have to be a little bit ruthless for everybody's sake. And I was fortunate that with my move, I was able to rely on a few of the guys coming across from Robert Half as well. So I had a few that we kept, and a couple of those have become very good friends and have stayed very much in my career history. And a few people that came across with me, and we built from there. So it was quite a quick shuffle, as you say, and you would have seen that from one end of the office. But there was a fair amount of consideration and calculation in there.
And when you're looking at the consideration and the calculation, what are the personal attributes that, when you look at a team or a group of people, what do you look at outside of their numbers? What do you look at to go, okay, you're going to make this, and this, you're worth the investment of my time?
It's hard to summarize, Daughter. It's one of those, if you could verbalize it, you'd write it down, and then it'd be easy to build a business.
Yeah, I know, right? That's what I was asking.
It's yeah. There is no secret ingredient. It's not like making bread, but there are some fundamentals for me, and those are demonstrated in not often obvious ways. I'm very much more around the way people act and the subtle message they send, and why or how they've done that. So, how quickly they respond to a request, how diligently they carry out an exercise, how hungry they are to ask for more, how prepared they are to try things on their own. And I've been fortunate, and I've tried to stick to, attracting people that in particular in startups and rebuilds, you need that proactivity, that willingness to take on board some criticism, and also understand, the positive message behind it, to embrace it, and to want to learn. Those who don't want to learn, those who don't want to evolve, and who don't know where they want to be in the next 2 to 3 years, they'll always struggle under me, because for myself to be successful, I need to be able to develop those beneath me, because they're the ones that ultimately make me redundant and push me on to having to do other things. So, I am looking for future leaders. I'm looking for people that want to have a big career. And I'll in return, I've always invested heavily in those people. So that's what I look for. It's very hard to measure and to verbalize, but it's one of those things that I think with experience you kind of get in your gut, and you kind of just have to believe you know what you're doing.
So Walters, Half, and Hayes would make most recruiters shudder. Like that's the Olympics of job hopping. That's full on. And
yeah.
So you've done 3 big businesses. You've experienced what bureaucracy is, what a lot of things that those big businesses have in common. They've a lot of good stuff as well, but a startup came along and really engaged and excited you. What was it about this opportunity that really got you going?
Yeah, it was a very exciting opportunity to be presented. I literally had 18 months at Walters, and I'd put together that team, and we'd had a record year. Everything was pointing in the right direction. You're right, there was bureaucracy, and there were some challenges at that time that maybe would always be there in a bigger corporate, or maybe just would be there with me in a bigger corporate. But this opportunity came along with the Anson partnership. They'd had success in their first 3 years on the East Coast. Brian at the time, the MD, was ex-Robert Half, so I knew of him and we knew of each other from my time there, and I always respected him as an individual. Niall, who owned the company, you've only got to check out his background, and ultimately when I met him, had a lot of synergy with him. And I could see the two of those two making a very strong team. So the opportunity to create something from nothing, with less support than I had at Robert Half and more breadth of responsibility than I had at Robert Walters was exciting. And then there was an opportunity.
It was the first time you were the main man in your career as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, I still had a support from the East Coast, but it was, this was the moment to really judge me on. We started out in serviced offices, but ultimately, it came down to picking the offices, negotiating the lease, furnishing the office, hiring everybody, building the database.
Let me take you back a step. So when you're looking at hiring everybody, so obviously you're getting the infrastructure in place, and you have a bit of help from the East Coast on that. When you're looking to build a team out, how do you do that? What are your, what's that process look like for anybody else that's listening that's thinking of scaling a business?
For me, again, I was fortunate. I mean, you always hope when you go to do something like this that you've impressed at least one or two people and they might come with you. But again, I was fortunate that 3 or 4 came with me from previous employment, and that gave me an immediate, feeling like it was a company and not just me sitting in a room. I'd continued to headhunt from the UK using LinkedIn, and I've always successfully sourced people from there. So we had 1 or 2 quick arrivals in that regard. And what I was looking for was a mixture. In the initial startup, myself, I can handle about 4 or 5 people as direct reports before it starts becoming a little bit too time consuming to do the correct training, the correct administration, and also then the balance of billing and leading. So you do need to start identifying, who's going to be your immediate sort of 2IC and your successor. If you can get a second one, then fantastic. And I was fortunate very early on to have Dara, who followed me across a few months after from Walters, and a young lad called Tom Birch, who joined me out of the UK, and they both very quickly established themselves as people that I liked and got on with, but also that were, like I said earlier, they were hungry. They knew where they wanted to be. I knew very clearly what I needed to provide them with in terms of support and a platform. And then as a team, it's easy to take the accolade and say, Dave Ayre built this, but you don't do it on your own. You need those people to come in to help you. Nadine came in very early on. We did have a couple that came and went, but very quickly, around those individuals, we were able to create a structure of who's going to run, the commercial team, the professional services team, the insurance team. And then, really it was about mentoring them to find people and bring them in and help them to hire and train, as opposed to it all being about me. So for me, the message I would send to anyone looking to start up or to scale quickly is you just can't do it on your own. You've got to identify 1 or 2 key people, and you've got to get them into your mindset and line up a way that you're going to attack and create your unique selling points. And then you've got to attack it together and build together. You can't do it on your own.
And how do you train a manager? How do you take somebody as a biller and train them as a manager?
One of the best lessons I learned, and this was primarily whilst at the Anson partnership. So, I always tip my hat to what I learned there from both Niall and Brian. At the times, you always challenge the concept of billing, visiting and regging people whilst you're trying to do everything else that you're being asked to do. But their argument is to lead. And I think the best way to develop management and future leaders is to lead them by example. So whenever I was having a tough period of time, either saying to my boss, Brian, I'm struggling to get my fees out, or I'm struggling to hire, or I'm struggling to find time to train, because he was doing the same thing. But whilst running 4 offices, it was very hard for me to say, I don't have time to do it, because he'd say, well, I'm doing what you're doing, but I'm doing it 4 times as much. So it was then a case of time management, and he would teach me and vice versa. And I found the easiest way to teach managers was to show them what you did, explain how you did it and why you did it, and then let them learn from their own mistakes on some occasions and guide them on others. And
Dave,
like I say, it's the individuals that do it.
Does that mean like running from like stuff on a daily basis or a weekly basis, or is it diary management you're talking about here, or
a mixture of all of those? There were certainly regular catch-ups with the team on a daily basis. There were some key meetings that the team would have with their staff around activity or around the day plan. There are weekly meetings to review what successes they've had and what their strategy is for that coming week or that coming month. So there are regular daily, weekly and quarterly structures that you have. I'm not necessarily, anyone that's worked for me will know, I'm not necessarily the biggest and most structured person, but I do a lot of my meetings on the fly. On the way out to meetings, I'm always touching base with people, how they're going, and getting their take on things. So I think when you're leading and when you're consumed by having to bill and having to, be out of the office, you need to be a little bit more adaptable. If I'd had to document every quarterly review and every monthly review and have daily 9 o'clock, I wouldn't have had time to do everything else. So there is a little bit of an ad hoc nature, but then, like I say, I was very quickly in a position where we had Dara and Tom, Nadine, and subsequently Sean Toomey that joined. I had those three to do a little bit more of that administrative side, and it allowed me to be a little bit more sort of on the fly.
So, I suppose what was the big attraction to joining the Anderson Partnership as opposed to just having your own project? It was really that they were built to sell, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was a very clear message early on about a concept called Comet is the word, and it's a quasi options kind of scheme. So you're never a shareholder, but you're incentivized to be around when the company sells, and you earn through performance of yourself and the office or the business the team that you're running. This structure of a percentage of sale price, and that really was the carrot that got me. Niall had success in building and selling a previous company. He had a very clear timeline for doing that. I've always backed myself to be able to, to build teams and to be successful myself. So I figured, whatever I could get out of it on top of that, be it 3 or 4 years down the line, that would just be a little cherry on top. So it wasn't the main reason for doing it, but it was a big factor because you're going to punch your card along the way on your commissions and your overrides. But
I've met a few who've exited successfully through that, and it's really worked out for them. So you never really know.
No.
So you're in WA. You know everybody. You're all business is pretty easy. You know every FC in town. You have your database, all the rest. You're just absolutely obsessed with the new, aren't you? So you just had to go again, didn't you?
Yeah, my wife said the same thing actually. But the opportunity the guys presented me came about because of their continued growth, and Brian was starting to get pulled pillar to post. The brand I was historically, more synonymous with was Walker Anson, which was accounting and finance. I felt like as a regional director, there was less support from Brian because of time, and I don't blame him. It was just circumstance. So I very much was communicating to them my ambition to take on or to sort of support him more, whether that would have been, helping with Singapore or whatever it had been. But they then came back with this proposition to take on a national MD role for Walker Anson, which involved being in Sydney. The rumblings were there for the WA economy. My little girl was just over 1 year old. So a lot of things lined up at that moment, which made it possible to move.
You escaped another recession.
I did. And this is why I said earlier, it wasn't judgment, daughter. I'd love to be able to sit there and say every one of these, I could see it coming and I knew what I was doing. But I didn't. Not to the entirety that it happened. My circumstances lined up and I was able to take advantage of, again, what was a significant career step for me from running, one location to running 4. Not many people get to make that move.
Are you still billing at this stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I went to Sydney, I had to start from scratch. I didn't know anyone. As you said, I went from 7.5 years in WA, where I kind of had a decent network that was affording me a nice lifestyle, and I got to know them personally, to stepping off the plane and being that new recruiter again, but now with a managing director title and a bigger cost base to cover. So, again, it comes down to people. I inherited a good director of Sydney. I'd left behind a very capable director of Perth at the time, Dara. I inherited 2 established directors in their own states in Wayne and Graham in Melbourne and Queensland, and I was able to find the time to get back to doing the basics, which was pick up the phone, get out the door, wear out the soles of my shoes, and start to create my name again. And
so you're running 4 offices, and you're doing a startup desk at the same time.
Yeah, and I had a boss telling me there's always time to do more because he was running 8 offices and still billing. So, when you look back, it's kind of insane, what you're able to achieve. But
do you still believe that all leaders should bill?
I can certainly, Yeah, the simple answer is I do. I think the degree or the structure of how they're compensated as a result of that billing does need to be considered more. I think that, certainly the advantage, and I do this in my current company now, my own business, I certainly see the value of being a leader, and as opposed to sitting there and saying when I used to fill jobs. So you get the advantage when you're an MD or a director level of one office or four. When I went interstate, I went out on meetings with people. I was able to talk about the market firsthand because I was still recruiting. I was still facing the same challenges of candidate sourcing and picking up jobs. I knew my competitors because I was kind of hearing about them on different job orders and from different firms. So I could talk more knowledgeably about the market. I could demonstrate a quicker value to my client and my job seeker. So I always believe that the staff and the people I worked with, I genuinely believe they respected me a little bit more because the things I was teaching them, the training them, and everything I was asking them to do, I was doing it myself. And as I had with Brian, like I say, I tipped my hat to him. Whenever I was feeling down, he was always able to show me a way that he was doing more and that I was capable to do more. And I feel I was able to bring that to the table as an MD, that you're not there simply saying, do the impossible. You just need to learn better time management and better delegation. But you've got to have good people. You cannot do any of the things I've done without good people.
What does an average day look like for a guy who's running 4 offices and building a team and building a desk?
Pretty standard. Claire was running Sydney, so she would run the daily meetings there. I'd either meet a candidate or be party to those meetings in the morning. Then you get about some BD. You're working jobs still, so you're still arranging interviews, taking references, and doing everything else. One day a week would typically be set aside, for a couple of hours or an hour to have a chat with each of the locations. So, Melbourne, WA, and Queensland. But again, they were not in too much need of micromanagement. They were very capable individuals. It was often troubleshooting, bouncing ideas out, and making suggestions. So my day was not dissimilar to a normal recruiter, with a lot of administrative stuff. We were writing training programs. We were coming up with incentive trips and strategies, and you're in there with Niall picking his brains about how you sell a business. You're in there with staff telling you they're not very happy about their manager or whatever it might be. So it's a blended, mixed up week, made up of the 4 criteria: always looking to hire people, always looking to train the people you've got at all levels, always looking to lead them and build, and then always working on how you're going to retain them, what they're there for, what they want. So a combination of those 4 things, always keep you busy.
And as soon as you get the desk built up, everything's running smoothly. What happens then?
I started for the first time. I started to realize that I was building my network for someone else again. And having done that for 7.5 years in WA, I was confident of where I'd be, in a number of years in Sydney. I didn't necessarily want to be getting the percentage of the billing or a percentage of the revenue or the percentage of the profit that I was getting in that business. If I was going to be out there doing what David Ayre does, which is build networks and build business and generate revenue and build teams, then I wanted to be doing it for a much higher chunk of the business. I had lots of conversations with my management group at the time. They were as keen to sell the business as anyone, but it wasn't happening. And there's lots of reasons for that, and they're not needed to be gone into. There, some I think we as a group could have controlled, and some I think that we just couldn't have allowed for. But it became a calculated guess for me that I didn't think we were going to get this business away, or Niall was going to get this business away in the next 12 to 18 months. And I was presented with an opportunity to do a startup where I would own a much higher percentage of the business. It would be documented. It would be mine. I still had big group support, but basically the building framework, the team I'd be building, the brand I'd be building, it would be driven and it'd be mine, and I'd be compensated,
accordingly,
on a higher scale. So it was a calculated risk between, do I think they're going to get it away, and all this time I've spent building this company and all this sort of, if you like, quasi equity that I'd kind of built up would have added up to a lot of money had he sold it. And so I was very mindful for the following 18 months to 2 years. I would have certainly kicked myself, but also been very grateful that my mates have made their money had he sold it. But I didn't think it would happen. And look, time's always the best judge of a decision. And to this day, they haven't sold it. And I've got a very healthy business now. So I'm grateful that I had the balls to make the decision I did. But again, it was another tough decision, but it was driven by career opportunity.
So you're doing the startup again. You've done this a few times, but this time maybe you don't have quite the support that you had before. What was that like in terms of getting staff, setting things up? Was it easier, or how did you find that?
Look, yeah, there is support. We are a separate business as part of a group of companies. I do have a very good board made up of some very successful individuals. So there's counsel there if I need to seek it. But by now, 2.5 years ago, I was pretty versed in building offices, attracting teams, and attacking a market. I sat in an office with an established IT recruitment business, and there was some culture and some sort of cross-selling that we could achieve from that. But for me, it was about just getting out there and finding recruiters. I know I can do that. So my mindset at that point is you're doing what you know. You don't need as much support. And as a result of not having as much support, you're earning a bigger chunk and owning a bigger chunk of that company. So, that was the culmination of everything I'd learned pre that to come and do it for myself and still retain a little bit of support where needed from a very, very impressive board of people that are in my very much in my world.
And have the recent changes affected hiring in recruiters? Because I know I'm not doing as much business in Sydney anymore because it's only the real senior people I can get through.
Yeah, it definitely affected it. In some ways, I think it was needed. The changes that were made. I think I've spent a lot of time with the visa experts, trying to understand the whys and the motivations behind it. And there are the political benefits for people that have made these decisions. But as an industry, we were taking a distinct advantage of the rules. And I do think that there were some valid reasons for the changes. I don't think the changes are helping anybody and necessarily going to achieve what they wanted. I think they've gone too far, maybe too extreme, with the now subsequent salary requirements and so forth. But and it is affecting those that are already in this market on existing visas that simply want to move and don't want an increase on their base salary. There are those that don't want it. So it's presenting challenges, but it's I think the reset button needed for the industry, and it's certainly happening in our businesses. We are being forced to look at unskilled, I understand, local talent that's that's already here, that's got its PR or that's got a passport. And we're looking to train them and develop them. I'm just grateful that I got in when I did, and I've already now got my group of management and associate directors that are that are in, and we've got those people. So look, we've actually got quite a high percentage of Australians in our company in 2XM Finance, and we're just continuing to look at expats. I'm still looking at people from overseas. It's just meaning that the years of experience and the success story in terms of personal billings, I expect a little bit more than maybe I used to.
Can you walk us through what that looks like?
Yeah, so for me, the sweet spot, I'm actively always looking. So I use LinkedIn every month, and I'm targeting a certain sort of audience, and that audience is, realistically now it's anything between 2 and 4 years experience at an established recruitment firm in an accounting and finance brand. They need to have a degree and a solid billing history. And I think if we look at the UK market now, that might culminate, depending on where they're based, somewhere between 150 and upwards £1,000 per annum. At that point, I have a conversation, and we ask people to come out on a working holiday visa. We give them the 6 months, and if they're happy and we're happy, then there shouldn't be any reason for us to not put them on a 457 or an ongoing visa. So there's definitely not like it's a no-no. It's doable. But previously I would have took somebody with 6 months or even 12 months financial recruitment experience and took a bit of a leap on them for the salary that was on offer then. But for now, that extra bit that the government is making us pay, it just increases that,
which is
90,000
plus super, right?
It is, 90 plus super, which it just puts the overall per annum cost of and having an individual. If you look at the rental portion and all the other overheads that they contribute to, it puts it up. It doesn't make it unmanageable, but You just need to see a little bit more sort of experience in the industry, a little bit more knowledge that they want to be in it for the next 3 years. They know they've had some good times, they've had some bad times. And unfortunately, you can't have that in your first 12 months. So, like I say, if you've been in it for 2 upwards years, I hired a guy only about 4 or 5 months ago with that profile. And I tell you what, he's come down here and he's killing it. He's doing really, really well. But again, he's just a normal guy in his mid to late 20s. Now got 3 years recruitment experience, been with me for about 8 months. And he's worth the money. And, I'd take 10 of them. So, very much the positivity for me is still there to hire, but it just means the requirements my expectations had to go up a little bit.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what's next for you, Dave?
Yeah, look, I always, you know me quite well. I always have this burning ambition to just keep doing new things. And
you're obsessed with the new, aren't you?
Yeah, there's a set of stars that are starting to align for me with our bigger group of companies that are very established in the UK and have been for a long time, but they don't do finance recruitment. So there's an opportunity for me next year to launch the brand in the UK. And that'll be me going over there. My partner's got family in Europe, so that'll make it easier for her. She's a Colombian, so we're a long way from all of her family, but she's got family in France and Germany. My little girl will be 6, so starting school over there will be logical timing. And I feel like the Australian business here with the group of directors I've got, a new guy I've just hired in our Sydney office, I feel like with the right management training and kind of mentorship, that we'll be ready for me to step away and for these guys to do what other people beneath me have done and that I did in the past, and that is to step up and really kind of build their own career, build their own business, and they'll all be given equity in the company to do that. So my opportunity to go there is selfish because it's good for me. It should be good for the company. I'll be able to come down here and continue mentoring them on a quarterly basis. And yeah, it's exciting. We're looking forward to being in the UK and like you did yourself, mate, getting into that European travel, maybe a bit more of an affordable lifestyle. Now I need a bigger house with the kids, but yeah, it's an interesting challenge. It's an ambition. It's something the group are supporting me with, but there's still tomorrow to deal with and next week to deal with. We've got to keep an eye on continuing to hire down here, continuing to train the guys I've got to retain them. And then we can always do these exciting things in the future.
Great stuff, David. Thanks so much for your time.
Not at all. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you personally. And if anything I've shared with the audience tonight, helps them in any way, then that's really what I get great pleasure from. So best of luck to yourself, mate, and the family. And I look forward to chatting with you again.
Yeah, well, we're excited to have you over in the UK.
No, I look forward to it, mate. And thanks for taking the time to have a chat with me. And I'll speak to you soon.
Speak to you soon.
Take care.
Well, there he is, the man, the myth, the legend, David Ayre. I enjoyed catching up with him. Really great guy, David is, and he is brilliant at what he does. And it's very hard for me to tell you how good he is if you don't see him in action, but he just keeps it real simple. He knows his stuff, he knows his discipline, he knows how to recruit, he knows how to win business, he knows how to manage staff, and he leads from the front, managing 4 offices and still billing. A lot of people in our industry, I hate to say it, well, I don't really, a lot of people hide behind spreadsheets, call themselves leaders, call themselves thought leaders, they hide away from the cutting edge of going out there and winning business. And he doesn't do that. He shows you how it's done. He gives you a bit of freedom to do it, brings you back in if you're not doing it right, and leads from the front. He's built teams wherever he's gone. He's done really well, and he doesn't overcomplicate anything. So it's quite simple. Here's the process. Stick to the process, and execute it really well, and build relationships along the way. He doesn't overcomplicate it. He doesn't let himself get caught into doing things that aren't productive and don't lead him to winning future business. Anyway, that's enough of me blowing smoke up him. Great interview, great guest. Big thanks to David. See you all next week.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android. The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.